Currency wars are triggered when some of the world's most powerful economies adopt drastic political measures to devalue their currency. This is to keep exchange rates as low as possible. Lower rates encourage trade. Countries can offer attractive export prices on the global market compared to competitors with stronger currencies and therefore higher prices. A weak currency also encourages domestic production, as importing goods becomes more expensive. This helps protect local farmers and industrial producers from fierce competition abroad. But there are disadvantages. A monetary union with a weak currency can struggle in the face of soaring oil prices, for example. Over time, this can slow growth across member states. There's also increased risk of speculative bubbles, as freer cash flow encourages people to invest in riskier projects. The current currency battle is between the American dollar, Chinese yuan, and the euro. Other major players include the Japanese yen, British pound, and Swiss franc, or among emerging economies, the Brazilian real and Russian ruble.
Hey, Shalom Akim, this is Ariala. First off, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shai. Once again, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shai. I want to send double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. I want to send much peace, love, and salutations to Yakim out there pushing the truth and sincerity. This algorithm we're going to talk about is going to be World War III algorithm, currency/trade war. World War III algorithm, currency/trade war. And the reason I want to go into this is because when you look out into things that are happening geoeconomically and geopolitically, we're starting to see the East and the West formulate ideas to either disrupt each other or to embolden their own financial systems. Okay, China and Russia are establishing their own banks. They're establishing their own vehicles of trade and means of trade outside of the dollar. And the U.S. and the West are trying to secure positions that they already hold in Europe and in the Middle East, and trying to get all these other nations locked into a system that they cannot get out of, man. All right. And so even back in history, you always had these issues. If you brothers watched the previous algorithm preview video that I did, I talked about how trade war and currency wars were even in the scriptures, and how controlling certain regions and how things are traded are very, very important to rulership and dominance in the planet Earth. Okay. So I want to read the scripture real quick, and then I want to get into this article, Lord willing. This is edifying, man. And if you haven't watched that video, the algorithm video preview that I did, please go watch that. And just like I said, there's certain technical understandings that you need to have in order to go through this stuff. So that Khan Academy, Lord willing, I'll put it in, after this in post editing. But that Khan Academy has a lot of good informational videos to where you can go to and just learn simple things about how currency affects trade and how that in turn affects the general economy and everything like that. Okay, so with no further ado, this is Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9. It says, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun." Okay, and the reason why I'm bringing this scripture out is because everything you're seeing that's happening is something that's already happened before, man. The only difference is it's a little bit more technological. Esau has just used his language and his deceitfulness with his tongue to make it seem like some complex idea when it's really not. Okay, all the systems of economics that he uses are old systems of economics that was used back in the day. And the trends that we see and everything that's happening, you can understand that there is a collapse and that there's a fight that's about to happen because it's happened in the past. We read about it in the scriptures. There's no new thing under the sun. Okay, this is from LouRockwell.com. It says Currency Wars, Trade Wars, World Wars by Gerald Celente, who's a good, person to go listen to, man. He always has different financial analyst talk and going into trends and things that he see. One of the things that he called was everybody's going to start to get into organic foods. You're going to start to see more new organic food places pop up. People are going to start getting into away from GMOs. Like he called that years ago, over 10 years ago. And lo and behold, man, if you're paying attention to the new things, that's kind of the things that are trending. That's something that's really happening, you know. So, you know, he's a good person to kind of listen to. He brings out a lot of good points. With no further ado, it says this: history is repeating itself. While the times are different and the names have changed, the underlying circumstances and basic fundamentals remain the same. The crash of 29, the Great Depression, plunging commodity prices, currency wars, trade wars, world war. Now, 46 years later, the Panic of '08, the Great Recession, plunging commodity prices, currency wars. Are trade wars and world war next? Commodity prices continuing downward dive is indisputable evidence of a deteriorating global economy. For many, the Great Recession is depression. The equation is simple. There's a glut of product and not enough people with enough money to buy them. You know?
Now, joining us now is Gerald Celente. Gerald is a trends forecaster since the 1980s. He's been accurately teaching people how to survive, how to prepare, and how to prevail. His organization is Trends Research Institute. You can find that at trendsresearch.com. He publishes Trends Journal as well. Joining us now is Gerald Celente. Of course, the markets were amazed to see what China had done, but Gerald wasn't. We talked back in the turn of the year as to what he thought would happen. I remember, Gerald, you holding up newspapers and saying, look at what they're not showing in the Wall Street papers and the U.S. papers, but look at what they're showing in China, a massively overvalued real estate market at the time. And of course, this move in currency is trying to pump some life into the market that the central controllers haven't been able to do in China.
Yes, and it's not going to work. The big fiction out there is that when currencies devalue, then you can sell your products overseas for more money. What they're not putting together is the reason is people have no money to buy these products, and you have an oversupply of commodities. That's why you see all these commodities crashing. So what happened last week? China announced its exports were down over 8%, and they've been down all year long. So now they're devaluing their currency, hoping that they could export more. Will they? A little bit, but that's not going to solve the problem because you have commodities crashing around the world. You look at the Bloomberg Commodity Index, David, it's back down to 2002 levels. Let's go back to 2002. The criminal in chief, the guy that started the war in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. People forget this. His popularity rating was crashing just days before 9/11. You can look it up.
Yeah.
Just got elected several months earlier. We were in a recession. After 9/11, go to Disneyland, go buy stuff, boost the economy, 46-year low interest rates. Okay, go back to that low level. That's where commodity prices are because there's a global slowdown. Now, China absorbs some 50%, for example, of the raw materials such as coal, iron ore, copper. You look at iron ore prices, you go back to 2011, it was $191 a metric ton. Now it's floating around at $50. Copper at 6-year lows, one after another. So what they're doing in China, and their imports are down as well, so that people in China aren't buying more. So now what they're trying to do with lowering their interest rate, their yuan value, is to export more. Now, you read all of the headlines from yesterday's newspapers. Surprise, it was a surprise, it was a surprise. It was no surprise.
And when you look out and you see the issues going on with China, and even now with retail sales, brothers are bringing out how retail sales are down, how Sears is closing up all these shops, Macy's is closing up all these shops. Where do you think they get their products from? They get their products from China. You're buying Chinese products 95% of the time. So with people not buying this stuff, that is not only hurting the retail stores, it's also hurting the manufacturers, which China is the #1 manufacturer across the world. For example, the issues that's going on in Brazil. Probably China buys a lot of their iron ore. If they're not making as much stuff, they're not going to buy as much iron ore. Right? So the iron ore markets in Brazil are suffering. Gas prices are going up. Their currency is going down. They can buy less gas. So they're suffering on the petroleum costs. So what happens? The trucks stop moving.
Well, the plummeting prices of oil and other commodities, along with sluggish demand, is proving almost too much to bear for many countries. Brazil is one of them, where the lack of cash is forcing some cities to cancel annual carnivals and celebrations. Paula Cabral reports.
Carnival season is approaching. But Brazilians are in no mood for parades. Commodity exporters have seen demand shrink, prices slump, and inventories swell. That was the case with iron ore, one of Brazil's main exports, and also with key agricultural commodities like soybeans and corn. Brazilians are bracing themselves for what could become the worst recession since the 1930s. This former agriculture minister sees a tough year ahead, but says the devaluation of Brazil's currency, the real, will help agribusinesses to survive the downturn.
What happens when the trucks stop moving? Famine. I.e. Venezuela. That process is already happening in Venezuela, and it's beginning to sweep across South America. Why? Because they buy who buys a lot of the South American goods? China and other countries like India. Okay? Russia. So as the global downturn begins to get bigger and bigger and bigger, we're going to see more and more of these little, baby nations crumble. Okay? That's what's happening. All right? And now people are trying to position themselves because you got people talking about trade wars by putting tariffs on these other nations. We'll talk about that in just a second, okay? Let's keep reading this article. Right here it says, and today, just as it was prior to World War II, when countries were denounced for devaluing their currencies to gain competitive export advantage, world reaction to China's recent yuan devaluation continues to intensify. Trends are born. They grow, mature, reach old age, and die. As evidenced by Ben Bernanke's appearance before the U.S. Congress in 2011, the war of words against China is a trend in progress. Okay? So here it talks about Bernanke criticizes China over currency. The chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve has accused China of damaging prospects for a global economic recovery through its deliberate intervention in the currency market to hold down the value of the renminbi, which is the Chinese currency. Speaking just hours after the Chinese government sharply criticized a U.S. congressional bill that would punish Beijing for allegedly currency manipulation, Ben Bernanke told a congressional committee that an undervalued renminbi was preventing the rebalancing of global demand towards emerging market economies. Right now, our concern is that the Chinese currency policy is blocking what might be a more normal recovery process in the global economy, he said. Now, going back up to it, he says the undervalued renminbi was preventing the rebalancing of global demand towards emerging market economies. Meaning that when China makes its currency devalue, that makes their goods cheaper to nations that are outside China. They can buy more goods from China because it's cheaper. Right? So China you got 1,000 shoes on the store. Right? In the store. You sell 500 of them hoes. You like, damn, we need to sell 500 more. Let's make these shoes cheaper. Right? So the other countries that are selling shoes are like, fuck. No one's buying it from their markets, these other emerging economies, market economies. Okay? So it's causing strain all across the markets because they devalued their currency. Okay? You see this happening everywhere. All right?
Yes, you know what I always say, and you're seeing it now. You have a currency war going on. Currency wars, and why are they lowering their currencies? As I said earlier, because they want to do more trade. Currency wars, trade wars, world wars. All you have to do is go back to World War II.
Exactly.
It's very clear. And in looking at the commodities and the currencies, let's put it together. Again, we just put out a trend alert today. And we said it was no surprise about the Chinese devaluation, and a new surprise is coming. And the new surprise, David, is get ready for a global equities meltdown. You look what happened in the markets. They were way down today. Right at the end, man, they pop them back up. Look what happened when gold went down several weeks ago. It began in China. Yeah, you know, the ones that are rigging the Shanghai index, or they rigged the Shanghai gold index, gold fund too. And here's what they did. Every day they trade maybe about, on the exchange, the gold exchange in China, about 16 tons a day. All of a sudden, the Japanese market was closed that day, so that was the only major Asian market open. Within 2 minutes, they dumped 33 tons of gold on the market. I'm not making this up, not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. The governments are doing everything they can to keep this phony Ponzi scheme going by pumping in cheap dough, shorting gold, and trying to make it look like their currencies are worth more than the digital paper they're not printed on. So we're looking at, as we state in this, and we lay out all the facts, you have a currency crisis and you have commodities plunging. How could anybody not see this? So they're coming out with this story now. Oh, we have to get some inflation. What are you talking about? The reason they got deflation is because prices are going down because there's more supply than demand. The jobs stink. You know the numbers. You guys write them.
Now, we're going to continue reading. Right now, our concern is that the Chinese currency policy is blocking what might be a more normal recovery process in the global economy, he said. It is to some extent hurting the recovery. All right. Trade wars. The day before Bernanke's accusation, the U.S. Senate voted overwhelmingly to open debate on a bill to impose tariffs on imports from countries that with undervalued currencies. In response to the bill, the Chinese government warned that if passed, the legislation would lead to a trade war. Now, for 4 years, now some 4 years later, and with scores of currencies substantially devalued, we forecast growing political pressure on nations to raise tariffs and or impose import quotas. So basically what this saying is, if you put a tariff on our goods to make our goods more expensive in the market, we're going to do the same thing to you. Okay? So that'll make the people who buy goods in our country want to buy somewhere else. That's called trade wars, man. And that always tends to lead towards world war.
I'm going to instruct my Treasury Secretary to label China a currency manipulator. Any country that devalues their currency in order to take unfair advantage of the United States, which is many countries, will be met with sharply. And that includes tariffs and taxes. I'm going to instruct the U.S. Trade Representative to bring trade cases against China, both in this country and at the WTO. 7, if China does not stop its illegal activities, including its theft of American trade secrets, I will use every lawful president. Hey, look, this is very easy. This is so easy. I love saying this. I will use every lawful presidential power to remedy trade disputes, including the application of tariffs consistent with Section 201 and 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 and Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. And when they say trade expansion, they're talking about other countries. They're not talking about us, because there is no expansion. They get the expansion, we get the joblessness. That's the way it works. We're going to make America great again for everyone, greater than ever before. And I promise you, if I become president, we are going to be working again. We are going to have great jobs again. You're going to be so happy. You're going to be proud of your president. You're going to be proud, proud, proud of our country.
Welcome back, and the gang is all here. And I want to go to Jim first, because, Jim, you were on Maria this morning, and you said Donald Trump will make America bankrupt. Take a listen.
Donald Trump might win, but he will lead to bankruptcy and war. How is he going to, what's he going to do, invade Nabisco in Mexico? Because they put their plant in Mexico, send tanks to Mexico? I mean, come on, this will be a disaster. The things he says he would do.
All right, I mean, Donald Trump says we should just have fair trade. Ford shouldn't take American jobs and take them to Mexico. Nabisco shouldn't do the same thing. That seems like common sense to most people. You think it equates to war and bankruptcy?
Well, what I said was Mr. Trump's policies would lead to bankruptcy for America. He's talking about trade war. He's talking about making people who have our money bring it back to the country. How are you going to do that? You're going to invade Korea and say you got to bring the money back. You're going to invade Japan and say you got to bring your money back.
Isn't there a way to put in economic policies so that gets that money to shift around a little bit? Or
that's called trade war, Charles. Come on. How are you going to do that?
So in other words, the deals that the relationships that we have with the countries that we do trade with, a lot of them that have all kinds of things that impose obstacles to American companies from doing business in their countries, but it's easier for them to do business here. Can't we level that playing field?
So you're going to say to the Japanese, we're not going to do business with you anymore? You're going to say to the Koreans, we're not going to do business with you anymore? You're going to say to the Germans, we're not going to do business with you anymore?
Every time I look at import-export data, Jim, we buy more of their stuff than they buy of ours. Don't we have some leverage?
Charles, throughout history, trade wars have led to real wars. That was my point this morning. Trade wars never work, and it always leads to real war.
And that's what we're seeing now with the emergence of Donald Trump and his election. The first thing he said was that we're going to put tariffs on Chinese goods. This is the next step. We had currency wars. When you see QE, quantitative easing, that is a form of currency manipulation. That is a form of currency war on everybody. By flooding US dollars into the systems, you artificially devalue your currency. That is currency war. So these other nations did that in response to QE. They're devaluing their currencies. Some even removing, like India and other places, removing certain denominations of money out of the market. So what you see what's happening globally is currency wars, and now we're seeing the entrance of trade wars. Okay.
We also saw U.S. Congress just come out with a report saying that the renminbi could mount a challenge to the dollar in 5 to 10 years. You say that challenge is going on now and a currency war is going on. How is it playing out?
Well, you know, everyone likes to accuse the Chinese of currency manipulation. Look, every country manipulates its currency to some extent, or what we call manipulation, they call policy. So I don't think anyone's exempt from that. But the U.S. is the biggest currency manipulator in the world. When you look at quantitative easing, which is just money printing, we had QE, QE2, and this new Operation Twist, all forms of monetary ease. People think it's about lowering interest rates. It is a little bit, but it's really about cheapening the value of the dollar. The theory is that if you have a cheaper dollar, it makes U.S. exports more attractive, so we'll sell more Boeing aircraft or General Electric wind turbines, et cetera. The problem is it starts out okay, but it never works out that way. There's retaliation. Other countries try to cheapen their currencies, where they put on capital controls, where they put on excise taxes, and currency wars turn into trade wars. And I described two previous currency wars in my book, what I call Currency War I in the 1920s and 30s, and Currency War II in the 1960s, 70s, on into the 80s. They both had disastrous results, and we're starting down that road again. There's a temptation to think you can get a quick fix for your economy by cheapening your currency, but it never works.
Now, when you go to Wikipedia and you go to trade war, You go in the trade war, it says this. A trade war refers to two or more states raising or creating tariffs on other trade barriers on each other in retaliation for other trade barriers. Increased protection causes both nations' output compositions to move towards their autarky position. You see how Esau makes this shit sound so fucking confusing, man? That's how they keep people out of this shit, man. Basically, look, I'm gonna make it to where if somebody from my country want to buy your shit, it's gonna cost more. Okay, I'm gonna put a tariff on it, man. That's what they're saying, and we do that to each other. Damn demons, man. That's Esau, though, man. But that trade war, what we're gonna get into is how those trade wars tend to lead towards hot wars. Here's another article from ZeroHedge.com. It says currency wars often lead to trade wars, which in turn can devolve into hot wars. Okay. It says, according to numerous high-level insiders, the global currency war is accelerating. Okay, and it goes over all these people who mention that. You even see among them George Soros, Angela Merkel, James Bullard. All right. It says, in Japan's escalation of the currency wars has caused leaders in the Eurozone, Norway, Sweden, South Korea, Taiwan, Colombia, Mexico. You see what's happening in Mexico right now. Peru, Chile, Venezuela, and many other regions to devalue or consider further devaluing their currencies. China may be joining as well. And James Rickert and Reggie Middleton think that Germany's demand for its gold is part of the currency war. It says, we've been in a global currency war for years. As the Wall Street Journal asked in 2010, beggar thy neighbor currency devaluations proved ruinous for the global economy in the 1930s. Is the world setting off down the same slippery slope again? Yes, we are. Despite drivel from ignorant sources, currency wars don't help the average person. Quantitative easing, the main lever to depreciate currency, hurts the little guy and only helps the super elite. Former Secretary of Labor Robert Wright points out that a weak dollar makes everyone poor, and any new jobs created by a policy of devaluation are low-wage jobs. It says, economist Mark Thoma noted in 2010, while the positive effects a currency war produced in the 1930s are likely to reappear, there is a chance of large negative effects such as a simultaneous trade war or the breakdown of the international monetary system. So let's hope a currency war can be avoided. All right. Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank President Charles Pozier notes that currency wars will not only hurt world trade and the economies that were involved. The IMF noted in 2010 that currency wars would represent a very serious risk to the global recovery. See, they just naming all these people, man. When you go down here, this is what Paul Krugman said about trade wars. He said, it is widely accepted that currency wars can lead to trade wars. As Time notes, a competitive devaluation game can turn into a trade war. Thereby losing countries start slapping tariffs on imports and exports to punish countries deemed to be manipulating their currencies. Trade wars, of course, make stuff more expensive for everyone, and that's just about the last thing global consumers, increasingly squeezed by rising unemployment and inflation, need. Okay? Indeed, there are signs that currency war-induced trade wars are already starting. And see this, hot wars. Brazilian President-elect Roosevelt said in 2010, the last time there was a series of competitive devaluation, it ended in World War II. Billionaire investor Jim Rogers says, trade wars always lead to wars. Top trend forecaster Gerald Celente said for years that currency wars turn into trade wars, which in turn lead to hot wars. Alright, then it talks about Jim Rickards, which I'll put in some clips of Jim Rickards. He likes to go into, he actually wrote a book called Currency War. Alright, and if you listen to his more recent interviews on YouTube, man, he's telling you, look, man, things are getting ready to get hot. These currency wars are turning into trade wars, man. All right, and that's what President Trump is screaming. And so what you see happening geopolitically all around the world is all these other nations getting prepared for that shit. They're getting prepared. You don't be surprised if you got the German elections are coming up. You got the French elections are coming up. Don't be surprised if there is some type of terrorist attack, somebody assassinated at those elections, man. Whether they be pro-Russian, so-called pro-Russian candidate, a so-called pro-globalist candidate, in order to maneuver these countries into a hot war. Okay? When you read down, it says, indeed, trade wars have been leading to hot wars for thousands of years. Ain't nothing new under the sun, Akian. For example, the war between Rome and Carthage leading to elephants in the mountains surrounding Rome essentially started as a trade war. Indeed, the top economic forecasters predicting war, the American policy of using the military to contain China's growing economic influence, and the U.S. considering economic rivalry to be a basis for war, the global currency and trade wars are creating a tinderbox. And so you see that same example. That's why you see China establishing something called the New Silk Road, where they're putting in these high power trains that can go all across, from basically move across China all the way through Europe at high speeds, and then they have a maritime route that's taken by the sea, and they're calling it the New Silk Road, man.
In February 2016, the first Silk Road train arrived in Iran after making a nearly 6,000-mile trip, taking just 2 weeks. This route is the start of what many are calling the New Silk Road, modeled after ancient trade roads which allowed the East and West to connect in the BC era. The new pathway is expected to revolutionize China as well as other countries along the way. So, what exactly is the New Silk Road? Well, to get a sense of where we are today, let's look at the original Silk Road. For a long period of time, there were localized kingdoms and empires spanning the globe. But the region between China and Western Asia and Europe is not very hospitable, and crossing it back in 200 BC would have been incredibly dangerous. As a result, while trade did occur, it was much more regional, and long-distance trade routes were rare. But when the West encountered Chinese silk, demand for it outweighed the danger. The huge demand led to an entire network of trade routes crisscrossing Central Asia. Although many other goods found their way along this road, it was named after its most lucrative good, silk. Most importantly for human civilization, the increased trade led to culture sharing between the East and the West. Religions, philosophies, and even diseases made their way from one region of the world to the other. And while the original Silk Road was a political and economic explosion, the new Silk Road promises to change the face of Asia. It's being hailed as the signature foreign policy initiative of Chinese President Xi Jinping, and could be the largest economic undertaking since the Marshall Plan post-World War II. In fact, many are saying that the road would be China's answer to the US's Trans-Pacific Partnership, which presently excludes China and Russia and seeks to streamline global trade. First and foremost, the new trade routes will make it easier for China to trade with former Soviet states, which have seen a sharp rise in trade since the USSR's collapse. The plan to build more roads, railways, ports, and other transit infrastructure is being called the One Belt, One Road Plan. This is comprised of two routes: a land road running from East Asia into Western Europe, and a maritime route stretching to Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Africa by sea. Along the way, these routes will pass through as many as 60 countries and regions, covering half of the world's entire GDP. Just the China-Pakistan corridor alone is expected to cost $46 billion. And while the total cost for the project is unknown, analysts expect the road to bring in an additional $2.5 trillion of trade to China in the next decade. This long reach across Asia will serve to boost economic prosperity, but perhaps more importantly, give China greater control over its neighbors. Some strategists in Beijing have also suggested that an increase in economic stability may undermine the appeal of radical Islam in the region, particularly in countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan, as well as violent autonomous states like Xinjiang. With trade agreements like the TPP threatening China's influence in the global economy, the new Silk Road is likely China's best bet at keeping trade supremacy, as well as exerting further control over Asia. In any case, China is about to own a huge number of infrastructure projects in a diversity of regional countries. That alone puts them in a risky, yet incredibly strong bargaining position with the rest of the world.
And if you study the history of the Silk Road, man, there was a lot of battles and ancient wars based over these trade routes. All right, because these trade routes, that's the first thing you cut off on the nation whenever you get ready to attack them, man. That's what they did to Jerusalem. Whenever they was coming in during the time of 70 AD, they cut off the trade routes that was feeding Jerusalem and was starving the people out. Well, it's the same thing now, man. If you can control how these people are eating and getting their food, if a nigga can't eat, he gonna fight. Trust, believe. Okay? And it's coming down to that globally. That's how we know we're diving into World War III. It's an inevitability. It has to happen. There is no choice. The system that has been created is a system of consumption, of eating, of take. Once you've taken somebody's goodies and everything they got, they're going to either assimilate, take the mark of the beast, or they're going to fight. And this is what we're getting down to. Okay?
What was the wages last month they came in? Oh, they went up at 0.2%. The lowest number since they started recording this stuff. And it's not only here. You have it, again, when your commodities are crashing in resource-rich countries, the people are out of work. So what they're leading us to, again, currency wars. You're hearing little Chucky Schumer all of a sudden shooting off his fat little mouth over here in New York about how we got to do something about the Chinese devaluing their currency, and this isn't the way you do things. Who are these people, these hypocrites that come up with BS like too big to fail? You little son of a gun. How about quantitative easing, Charlie, that you gave all the big companies this cheap dough to do mergers and acquisitions that are now at levels, historic highs, reaching levels beyond 2007, Charlie, and you're yelling about the Chinese, Charlie? Oh, I forgot the cheap dough that you can now buy back stocks from these big companies so they boost their stocks and the big cats make more dough, Charlie. So now they're yelling at China. So this is what you're seeing coming together here. Currency wars, trade wars, world wars.
Okay, I'm just going to read this briefly about the Silk Road, and then we're going to move on to the next. As a matter of fact, let me pull this scripture real quick. This is in the book of Revelation. I just wanted to make this point real quick. And this is kind of going further on how there's no new thing under the sun. You know what I'm saying? This is Revelation chapter 10. I'm sorry, Revelation chapter 17, verse 10. And there were 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, but even he is the 8th. And is of the 7th, and he goeth into perdition. And that's talking about America as that 8th that comes out of Great Britain. All right, that comes out of that colonial Great Britain entity. Okay, and how those economies and how they were ran were based off Rome. Well, that was based off the previous empire that was running, and that was based off the previous empire that was running. That's why these trade routes that you see on these maps is nothing but extensions of rulerships and how to move currency and money and information across the world. All these things are tied together. Okay? And this 8th kingdom is tied to all the other ancient kingdoms, the wicked kingdoms, man. Which goes back to really Rome, man. All its philosophies and doctrines. And that's that beast system. And it's going to go into perdition. How? By thermonuclear destruction. That's what's being prepared, man. That woe. Alright? Revelation chapter 11, verse 14. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh. Quickly. It don't just cometh, it cometh quickly. And that's what we see tumbling and tumbling. This actual empire is not a long rulership. This actually is a very short rulership. All right. When you look in the scriptures and go into forever, that's at least 1,000 years. You know what I'm saying? So if you got a rulership of 200 something years, that was a baby rulership, man. This place is gonna go down, man. And these woes have came quick. World War I, World War II, World War III. It didn't take no time for these nations to be banging up against each other, man. But this last war is gonna culminate into ultimate destruction. Okay. Let's read this real quick, just for information's sake. Silk Road. The Silk Road, and this is actually a pretty good website to go to, ancient.eu. You Akyam, go here, man. You just find little factoids and tidbits about ancient history, man. They got the maps and everything for you, timelines, so you can just get everything together, especially as you're reading through the scriptures. The Silk Road was a network of trade routes formerly established during the Han Dynasty of China, which linked the regions of the ancient world in commerce. As the Silk Road was not a single thoroughfare from east to west, the term Silk Routes has become increasingly favored by historians, though Silk Road is the more common and recognized name. Both terms for this network of roads were coined by the German geographer and traveler Ferdinand von Rodenbach, whatever his fucking name is, all right, in 1877 CE, who designated them Swedenstrasse or Silk Road or Swedenstrassen Silk Routes. The network was used regularly from 130 BCE, when the Han officially opened trade with the West, to 1453 CE, when the Ottoman Empire boycotted trade with the West and closed the routes. And if you notice that time, that's basically when the Edomites started to really get up in there during that 1400 period, because the Byzantine Empire, which we were running, was a very efficient empire economically. Okay, we didn't use unjust weights. That started happening more and more and more whenever the Edomites got up in there. All right, they figured out how to use the silkworm, and basically they closed down those routes that went throughout China, so they could hoard the wealth. All right. When you go into this, I suggest you brothers go and read this, but there's a lot of good information in here on the Silk Road and stuff like that. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next article. This next article is would Donald Trump's China tariffs spark a trade war? It says, after propelling his presidential campaign with plans to reclaim jobs lost to China and place steep tariffs on the Asian economic giants' imports, President-elect Donald Trump took an interesting turn Thursday night as he began discussing Chinese foreign policy. And this was written back on December 9th. All right, in December of 2016. It says, just before diving into his views on how the U.S. and China should get along over the course of the next few years during a speech in Iowa, Trump offered a tough-to-debate assessment of where things currently stand. They're not great. One of the most important relationships we must improve, we have to improve, is our relationship with China. That's how he says it. He told the crowd in Des Moines. Few on either side of the aisle would debate that sentiment on its face. China's recent activity in the South China Sea has at times prompted responses from U.S. military vessels, including a sojourn by a naval warship in October.
This is the number of US military bases surrounding China. This map, it looks very similar to NATO military bases on Russian border. With dozens of US military bases encircling China and America's historic nuclear presence in the Pacific region, a war between the greatest military power and the world's second largest economy is no longer unthinkable. The threat of South China Sea becoming big news again. The media is beating the drums of war as the world is being primed to regard China as a new enemy. I smell the same technology being used again and again and again. You know, the mainstream media says that Russia is the main enemy of the humanity. Now we have mainstream media saying that China is the new enemy of the humanity.
China has been accused of fresh aggression in the South China Sea, this time by an influential American think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Let's now get more from RT's Emily Sue. Hi there, Emily. Well, give us more details on this dispute.
Well, Marina, if we take a look at the screen behind us, this may just looks like a bunch of boring rocks and reefs in the middle of the sea, but they're actually located in one of the next potential global flashpoints of conflict. The Spratly Island chains located in the South China Sea are claimed by China, Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Taiwan. And the reason why everybody wants their slice is because this region is very rich in resources. It's also one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. Every day, over 10 million barrels of oil are being transported across the sea. And that is the reason why the territorial disputes here has led to an ongoing war of words between some of the world's biggest powers.
Provocative and destabilizing act which would automatically raise tensions.
We don't stir up trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble. China will not swallow a bitter pill and will never allow our sovereignty and secure rights to be infringed.
The South China Sea dispute worsened over the past 2 months after an international court at The Hague rejected China's territorial claims in the South China Sea and ruled in favor of the Philippines. Now, this looks like a dispute between China and the Philippines, but the country that's really pulling the strings behind the scenes is miles and miles and miles away, the United States. Not only is the U.S. a treaty ally with the Philippines, it has long stressed on the importance to maintain a military presence in the region as part of its pivot to Asia strategy.
It is a legally binding tribunal decision, and our expectation was before it was made and is now after it's made that all claimants are going to abide by it.
Of these satellite images purporting to show an increasing Chinese military buildup on the Spratly Islands. At the same time, another U.S. media outlet has accused China of launching a stealth invasion in the region after China deployed hundreds of vessels to patrol the Senkaku Islands or the Diaoyu Islands, which is claimed by China and Japan. So essentially what we're seeing here is the U.S. constantly accusing China of increasing military tensions in the region when they're the ones who's interfering with territorial disputes literally 8,000 miles away.
And if you've been noticing that, Lord, when I put a clip in there, man, you know, China's doing military drills. They're establishing those islands. And when you study the history of the Silk Roads and basically how Japan teamed up with Great Britain to take down the Chinese, the first thing they did was go up in them islands, man, and stop them seaport trades, cut their ass off. So China's got their military in those islands, and they letting America know, look, you ain't running up in here, bruh. No chance. So the U.S. is taking reconnaissance, doing what they need to do to see Chinese responses so that they can make countermeasures on attack. That's what's happening. It's all war games out there. Okay? So when you hear about this in the news, these drills, that drill, they did this, they flew in this airspace, they trying to get a response from these other nations so they can get reconnaissance and see how they move. Okay? They ain't stupid. It says, and while the two countries haven't come to blows by any means, America's presence in the region undoubtedly has rattled those in Chinese President Xi Jinping administration. On the economic front, aside from Trump's accusation of Chinese currency manipulation, the Commerce Department earlier this year slapped certain Chinese steel imports with significantly higher tariffs, accusing the country's steel makers of importing product into the U.S. at an unfair price. A snafu involving President Barack Obama at a Chinese airport, meanwhile, raised more than a few eyebrows in September after Air Force One touched down in China's Hangzhou region for the year's Group of 20 summit meeting. A set of stairs that would have allowed the president to disembark normally was nowhere to be found. The scenario was widely interpreted as a Chinese snub of the U.S. president, though the reality seems to point more to chaotic confusion than intentional slight. Okay? I'm gonna skip down. It says, but then Trump continued, the nation of China is responsible for almost half of America's trade deficit, he said. You have the massive theft of intellectual property, putting unfair taxes on our companies, not helping the menace of North Korea like they should, and the at will and massive devaluation of their currency and their product dumping. Other than that, they've been wonderful, right? So basically, what you're hearing is rumblings within the economic system, the economic political system, man. It's coming to an edge. It's coming to a fight, and all the stuff that we're reading about here, you're seeing it play out in South America. You're seeing it play out in Central America. These places are chief places of commodities. Wood, grains, fruit, steels, copper. All that comes from those regions. So meanwhile they fighting geopolitically, these nations are having famines and shit. Okay? And it's going to get worse until a world war. Somebody's going to want to be King Dingaling. Alright? When we skip down, it says Trump China related proposals, particularly his calls to slap fees on China imports, have already engendered skepticism. Steep tariffs, some analysts say, ultimately could end up hurting the economies of both the U.S. and China. If he starts throwing around trade barriers to China and Mexico, they're going to retaliate, and that's not a good outcome at all, says John Canale, chief economic strategist at LPL Financial. Mr. Trump could fulfill some of his campaign promises on trade or on immigration, but those same policies are likely to hurt businesses, both small and large, in the long run. Let me see. When you go down here, it says through October, America is running a $288.8 billion trade deficit with China in 2016, a figure that accounted for more than 47% of the country's overall international shortfall, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Driving that gap, China is far and away the biggest importer of goods to the U.S. Though it's worth noting it was also the third largest buyer of American-made products last year, behind Canada and Mexico. See? So the biggest buyer, one of the top buyers, can put tariffs on your shit, and that will hurt your economy bad, man. Because Chinese buyers are not going to be buying the stuff from America. Their software, iPhones and shit, whatever. They ain't going to be buying it. They'll get it from somewhere else. That's going to hurt the U.S. economy, man. That's going to lead to war. If you start having that type of trade war. And when you need if you brothers don't know what a trade deficit is, that's definitely something to go and look into, man. How the currencies can affect how trade is, and how the value of those currencies can affect like the money that's being exchanged in between each other. And once if that deficit gets out of whack, it can really throw the markets into a tailspin. Okay? And that's what we see happening, man. Alright, so I'm gonna move. This is a good article, man. I'm gonna put it in the discussion section, man. I advise you brothers to read it, because it just gives you more little insight on the back and forth that's happening geopolitically. Alright, and it's a backdrop to what you read in the scriptures. You get a good idea of what you read in the scriptures, like when it says here in Zephaniah 1:11, "Hail ye inhabitants of Maktesh, for all the merchant people are cut down, and all that bear silver are cut off." So you be like, okay, how ye inhabitants of Maktesh? Where was Maktesh? You go to Maktesh. It says Maktesh, a quarter of Jerusalem, so named. It is supposed on an account of the configuration of the ground associated with, and then it quotes the scripture, with the fish gate and Manesh, or second quarter. Most authorities think it was in the northern part of the city, and many consider that the name was derived from the hollowed out form of that part of the Tyropeon, just north of the walls. It says, where foreign merchants congregated. All right. It says, others that suggest a hollow farther west, now occupied by the Maristan and the three long bazaars. Okay, what I'm pointing out here is where foreign merchants congregated. So it was a financial center. It was a financial center. It was a hub, all right, of commerce. So when you read here in the scripture, and it says, how ye inhabitants of Maktesh, for the merchant people are cut down, all they that bear silver are cut off. Man, you're seeing the financial centers. What is a financial center? Let's get that on Wikipedia. A financial center is a location that is home to a cluster of nationally or internationally significant financial services providers such as banks, investment managers, or stock exchanges. A prominent financial center can be described as an international financial center or global financial center, and is often also a global city. So right here in Jerusalem, in the part of Jerusalem, you had Maktesh, and it was a financial center. And these people were going to howl because it was going to get cut off. War is coming. All that shit's going to stop. That's what's happening. All right. Regional and national financial centers interact with these leading centers and may act as business feeders or provide local access to them. An offshore financial center is typically a smaller, lower tax, more lightly regulated jurisdiction that primarily serves non-residents, like Sweden. In a number of large cities, the name International Financial Center is given a skyscraper located in business districts. For example, the landmark International Financial Center, Hong Kong, China. All right. So these things are going to be happening in the markets before war comes. Because look, when you read the next verse here in Zephaniah 1 and 12, and it shall come to pass in that time that I will search Jerusalem with candles and punish the men that are settled on their leads, that say in their heart, the Lord will not do good, neither will he do evil. It's going to go how it's been going. Therefore their good shall become a booty, and their houses a desolation. They shall also build houses, but not inhabit them. And they shall plant vineyards, but not drink the wine thereof. The great day of the Lord is near. It is near and hasted greatly, even the voice of the day of the Lord. The mighty shall cry there bitterly. All right. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. All right, because war is going to be happening, man. All your shit's going to be taken. That's what's going to happen, man. That's what's being ushered in. But these global elites think they're going to win out of it, but it's not going to be the global elites. It's going to be the chosen, the elect of the nation of Israel. All right, emboldened and empowered by the return of the Lord. His name is Yahushua. All right, that's what's coming. That's what we see happening. That's why we're reading this. It's all a part of the Most High's algorithm. That's why we call this the World War III algorithm. I'm centering this around things that are leading into World War III, but there's different components of the Most High's algorithm. All right, but right now we're focusing on World War III, so you can read these things in the scriptures and understand and know. Look, it's going down. Okay. But you know, there was another article. I'm going to put it into the comment, into the discussion section too, man. You know, Lord willing, this was edifying to you, Akiam, man. I want to give all praise and glory once again to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. I want to send double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Much peace, love, and salutations to all you Akiam out there pushing the word in sincerity and truth. Shalom.